welcome to the Sacred Window podcast. Here, we look closely at the intersections of the postpartum window, the Ayurvedic perspective on health and healing, and the universal mother principles that are the keys to giving and receiving effective care. Hello, I'm Christine Eck. I'll be taking you through interviews with professionals who are making a profound difference in the lives of their clients, conversations with individuals brave enough to share their stories of vulnerability as a way to lift up others, and my own journey through birth, parenting, caregiving, and building a conscious business. We are here to honor the sacred windows, the profound transitions in life that give it all meaning. Welcome to the conversation.
And I will never be the same again.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Sacred Window podcast, where today we're going to be talking about holding space for crisis in birth and postpartum. My guest is Chloe Charbonneau. She is a birth and postpartum doula working out of Tompkins County, New York, and the Berkshires, Massachusetts. And Chloe started out as, working as like working with babies, helping to care for babies. And you moved into doula care. And as we were talking and getting to know one another, I really learned about you that this moment of supporting people in birth where crisis is happening is something that you've been really called to. And so let's open this discussion up. First of all, thank you so much, Chloe, for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today. And hello, everybody.
It's a really important topic because oftentimes we're not trained how to hold space when someone is in a moment of panic or crisis. And we come into this work wanting to be as supportive as possible. And yet, when we're faced with the unexpected, we can feel untethered ourselves, like we don't quite know how to handle this. So, I'm really looking forward to unpacking, looking closer at those moments of crisis and how we as care providers can hold space and show up for people experiencing any level of that. So, to get us started, let's just talk about what does crisis look like in the postpartum window, and maybe, how is it different from birth? How is it different from other life crises? And what have you found in your experience, Chloe?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say I do think crisis in the postpartum period does look a bit different than what people sort of might imagine when they hear the word crisis. We think a car accident, a medical emergency, something that's sort of sudden, loud, in your face, hard to ignore. And that can happen in postpartum, but generally, in my experience, the sort of postpartum crisis is often quiet and it's more subtle. Like you're not necessarily going to notice right away when you're in someone's home that they are in a crisis in postpartum, that they are maybe experiencing some really intense mental health difficulties. Versus in birth, when people think of crisis, they might think shoulder dystocia or needing an emergency C-section, where there's sort of all of a sudden there's like a switch and everybody realizes, okay, something's wrong. I think what's tricky about postpartum is that it can be really slow and it can sort of creep up on people where they themselves don't even realize that they're in this state of crisis where they're not functioning well, they're not eating well, they're not sleeping well, they don't feel bonded with their baby, they're maybe isolating themselves, or they don't have a community to even be, communing with to get that support that's so important, especially postpartum. So for me, some of the signs that I look out for is sort of just like general attitude in people. Are they feeling sort of motivated to face the challenges that come with postpartum? Are they feeling really very beat down? Are they saying things like, I don't think I can do this? I miss the way my life was before. And all of these thoughts are normal and people have them, but it's the degree to which they're lasting and how much of an impact is that having on day-to-day life. So yeah, that's the biggest difference I think is that it's a lot less in your face. You kind of have to stick around for a bit and really spend time with someone to realize if that's what's happening.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think something that came up for me as I was listening to you is that we often are interspersed with moments of like, okay, I'm handling it okay. It's not like it's the whole time. So that's where I think this surprise can come in for the person actually experiencing is they don't necessarily identify themselves with being in crisis. And I don't know that labels are super helpful in general. However, I do feel like there is this kind of creeping up and accumulation of depletion or discomfort or anxiety over time that when it is becoming in the way of a person's ability to enjoy their life and their baby and their family and their postpartum experience, then I think, yeah, let's look closer at this.
Yeah, and I think another way to think about it, because like you're saying, I mean, postpartum is very up and down and it can be all over the place and it can be amazing and it can be really hard. And just because it's really hard doesn't mean you're in crisis and it doesn't necessarily mean anything's wrong. But I think something to look out for, if you are the person postpartum, is to really take a moment to sit with yourself and ask, like, what is my baseline? Sort of like, what am I returning to after, a spell of crying that might be really stressful? Once that's done, what do I come back to? Am I coming back to, okay, that was really hard and, we got through it and I'm learning and, I'm still bonding with my baby? Or am I coming back to, when is that going to happen again? I'm feeling overwhelmed. I don't know who to reach out to, almost like this suffocating feeling. So it's really, what is that baseline for someone that's going to be the difference between postpartum is just difficult for a lot of people and this is, an exceptionally challenging time for someone.
Mm, yeah, that's really helpful, Chloe. So thinking about in your role as a doula and as you've noticed in your own experiences that you've been able to create a skill set around supporting people who are navigating experiences of crisis, how are you showing up? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, yeah. So I think the the biggest way that I show up for my clients and really anyone in crisis, and this does apply to those crises that are, really sudden and not necessarily postpartum, just in general, being able to really settle myself, take a breath, get a little bit more quiet, and just sort of tell myself, like, okay, we're gonna sit in this with this person, and I'm gonna try as hard as possible to sort of be like an anchor for them. So I'm not going to get really stressed out and start, getting up here, sort of like, oh my gosh, are you okay? What's going on? That energy is very, it sort of increases the stress in a room. And of course, I'm also not going to brush it off and tell someone, oh, everybody feels that way. Don't worry about it. So trying to really internally settle myself and just sit with that person. I think, we kind of have an opportunity in postpartum because typically it's not sort of a really all of a sudden we need to make big choices here. It is, like I said, a little more slow and long lasting. We can slow down, sit with that person, you know, you don't even need to take their baby. Let them hold the baby, but just sit next to them and just ask, how are you doing? This looks really tough. Or gosh, I've been here for 3 hours and yeah, like he's been crying for a lot of that. How are you handling that? Sounds stressful. And just sort of noticing that this might be difficult and they can say it's not, and that's totally fine. Sometimes you're going to misread a situation, but oftentimes I think being that very calm presence and being the one to initiate, this looks hard and I would find this hard if I were a parent. Really is sort of giving permission to that person to say, yeah, this is really hard and like a lot of times people say thank you because everybody's asking me, isn't it amazing? And aren't you loving it? And, sometimes people aren't, and it's really challenging. So I think being the person to sort of open that conversation and showing right up front, I'm not judging you. And if you're not, if you're a mom and you're not loving being a mom right now, it's okay. I'm not going to think you're a terrible parent because you're not enjoying this pretty stressful moment. So the non-judgment I think is also very, very important.
Yes to all of that. That's so good. I feel like I literally was just having this conversation today of how when there's one person in the room, and we talk about this in the program too, of like um, when the care provider can come in and provide that presence that's
Mm.
grounded and regulated, all of the other energy in the room starts to recalibrate to harmonize with that. So even just coming in a grounded space that's leading with love and non-judgment,
Yeah.
it's medicine in itself, and it's inviting
Oh,
everybody
yeah.
else to like come back to this very real essence of we're okay. We're all here. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I think also, especially as a doula, if someone's hiring you, they're sort of looking to you as somewhat of a guide or a touch point of like I'm going to go to you with my concerns or I trust you to be in my home during this time. And so if I'm able to show up and say like, "Hey, I've seen this before. You're not alone and you're not crazy and this is hard. And I'm not judging you. I'm not scared of you. I don't think you're a bad parent." That gives them the permission that I think a lot of parents are looking for to admit that to themselves too.
Right. Yeah. I think there's so much that we are integrating and unpacking and trying to grapple with, when those hard moments come and we maybe not have the capacity to handle it the way that we want to handle it, we punish ourselves. Like all of that is like really, laser pointed in. Like, we really blame ourselves in a lot of ways. And to have that reassurance that you are you are perfect. It is going to be fine. This is hard and I'm here. And there's so much self-love that we have to foster. I think we have an opportunity as care providers to help people kind of access that empowerment and that self-trust and the understanding that I know my baby better than anybody. I love myself. I am going to make this happen. And I mean, it's amazing what one person present who is helping to create a pathway to that energetic access point, it makes such a difference.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So when we are working with a family, it's not just the mom, it's not just the birth giver, it's also the whole family and its partners. So oftentimes when there is crisis, the attention is put onto the birth parent, and how can we ensure that we're doing that in a way that doesn't leave out the important experiences and the ways that partners are also navigating this transition and possibly also feeling their own moment of crisis in response to their partners, or also just navigating this transition on their own. Um, I've worked with families where the partner was really struggling to just kind of handle the understanding that he was now a father, the vulnerability that I witnessed in him trying to like stabilize, it was pretty intense. So when you're working with families, what have you seen with partners, and how have you handled and supported them? How are you sharing your gifts and passion for caregiving with others? In a world where education and awareness around the postpartum window is lacking or missing from our modern systems, we have a profound opportunity to shift that paradigm. You may be a few simple offerings away from making a truly impactful difference in the lives of mothers and families in your community. We are here to support your journey in the ways that work best for you. Schedule a conscious care strategy session to meet one on one with me, and let's identify the right next step for you to begin a path of conscious care for new families that fits your life and your needs. Visit www.sacredwindowstudies.com/strategy-session to schedule a time that works best for you. That's www.sacredwindowstudies.com/strategy-session.
Yeah, I really think birth partners get neglected a lot of the time. Honestly, throughout pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, and some of that I understand. I understand a lot of attention going towards the person growing a baby and delivering a baby. But yeah, once that baby's here, and you now have two parents that can interact with this child outside of the womb, some people find that really challenging. And especially, I think a lot of dads can find it really hard to feel connected to this baby that they didn't grow in their body and they didn't birth and they're not breastfeeding and they don't have the same hormonal sort of connection, that dyad that typically a birth parent and a baby do have. That in a way can sort of feel like a loss to some parents. And that can cause its own slew of problems. And I think a lot of dads, even in a joking way, will sometimes say, like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. And, they sort of make these comments that are meant to sort of be funny. But at this point, I've heard them so many times that sometimes I just pause and I say, yeah, you do. You do. Like, I just watched you comfort that baby and calm them down, or I just watched you change a diaper, which you had never done before. Like you're learning this for the very first time. You do know what you're doing, and what you don't know, you're learning, because you care for this baby and you love this baby, and that's really important. And I think giving credit to the efforts and the knowledge that they're gaining, and sort of validating that we're all learning this together. This is a new little human who has their own preferences and personality and way that they want to be taken care of that they can't quite communicate very well yet, other than just crying. Um, Acknowledging that I think is really important. And that's sort of a common thread throughout this topic, is that the acknowledging and validating of what everybody in the family is going through, even the baby. I'll say to the baby, yeah, this is hard, you're upset, or things like that. I think that really helps people to feel seen. Another thing that I encourage birth partners to do after the baby is here, if they are feeling that sort of not super attached to the baby, not really sure what to do with the baby, especially if the baby's breastfeeding on demand, they might be with the birth parent a lot. And there's not a lot of time to sort of be one-on-one. Is to just have a really small routine that they do every day that the baby can just be a part of, or be set down and kind of watch them do. So for one family that I worked with, the dad really liked making coffee and had a very specific routine for how they like to make their coffee. It took about 10 minutes every morning. And I said, why don't you put that baby in a baby carrier? Or if that makes you nervous, that's okay. You don't have to do that yet. You could put them in the little baby bouncer. You could just put them in the bassinet. If they fall asleep, it's fine, but just to have them near you while you do this routine. And now that baby's about 6 months old and they still do it every morning together. And that's been like a really beautiful bonding experience for them. So I think it's finding those moments that are unique to just the two of them, to allow them to really have that time together, for that parent to feel like they are unique and special and have something of their own to give to this baby. They're not just the secondary parent that gets tossed the baby when when mom needs a break.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction is having it not be this is your time so that the other parent can nap or whatever. It's
Right.
like, this is your time because you're a parent and you get to have this one-on-one special time. And it's so bonding and healing and ultimately expands relationship and love and connection and confidence and nervous system like regulation. Oxytocin is like dropping, there's so many opportunities um, for balanced relationship building to happen in those moments. And I don't think that I'd ever really given it that distinction of let's not have it be your time to give the other
Mhm.
parent a break. This is for you. This is special for you. Um, and I think that, what you talked about in terms of routine is like we talk about that as one of the ways that you pacify Vata dosha, which is this elevated air and space element, which when it becomes too elevated and out of balance, we experience that fragility and um, anxiety, and this is where many mood disorders are stemming from. And so when we do things such as routine, and of course, like people who are receiving solid postpartum support, where their digestive system is being strengthened little by little, where they're emphasizing rest, where maybe they're getting some herbal support, they're hydrated, all of these things go a long way in creating the regulation so that those moments of crisis don't actually happen. It's much
Right.
harder, I think, to handle people in crisis when they're already in crisis before you get there.
Yes.
I've worked with clients where they didn't call me until it was the moment of crisis.
Yeah.
The baby was like 5 months old. And so now I'm like stepping into the situation and my heart is breaking for this family. But we have a lot of repair, it feels like, to do. And we can always start from where we are, but it's harder. It felt harder.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's also why I sort of encourage other postpartum workers, or especially if you're doing full spectrum work where you attend a birth and then continue postpartum, to really check in. Of course, you don't want to be overstepping or too pushy, but just gently, but consistently, even if it's just a text saying, hey, how are you doing? How's your partner doing? How's the baby doing? Just give an opportunity for them to express, we're okay, and sometimes I'm like, okay, what's going on? And sometimes it's not a huge deal, and sometimes it is something bigger. And I think also coming from a place of working with a lot of postpartum families over many years, it's become easier for me to sort of see, okay, this looks like it could be turning into something a little more serious. Um, and I'm gonna pull from what I've used with other families in the past. And that can be sometimes as simple as like, this parent is finding breastfeeding really hard, and they're really overwhelmed. But I know a really good IBCLC, a lactation consultant, and let's just give her a call and see if she can come by. And in a few, meetings with that person, this thing is really getting addressed and taken care of. I think a lot of times parents, they don't feel like they have those resources. They haven't done this before. And even if they've had a kid before, that doesn't mean that they, went through the same challenges with that child. And so as a doula, you're really in a unique position to be like, well, I've worked with tons of families, and I've seen lots of different issues, and, this might not work, but it's been pretty successful before. So I think we should give it a try. What do you think? Um, and that what do you think is also important. I think making sure parents feel very in control and involved in the decisions being made around their care is very important to me. I don't want to feel like I'm, managing a family. I'm really there to be a resource. So I'll bring ideas, but if a parent says no, I'm not up for that right now, that's fine. We're going to pivot and we're going to look for something else that makes sense right now, and maybe we'll return to that idea a little bit later when things are in a different spot.
Yeah, I love that. It's part of that instilling autonomy and
Yes.
empowerment to their decisions, giving them the opportunity to, yeah, that sounds good, or not yet. Yeah. And that you totally were reading my mind with the resource list too, because it's very true. We don't have it built into our understanding of birth and postpartum that it takes a village. It takes many people to help offer fully supportive care. And we don't know the different things that may or may not arise for us. And so, as the caregiver, when we have a really clear understanding of who's in our community, who's doing this, who's doing that. And we know that when something is coming up for a family, we can help them access additional resources that we can't offer to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's huge. And so, you know, kind of winding it back to, I think for me, caregiving has become such a reciprocal experience, whether it's, me parenting my kids. I have an understanding of how to fill my own cup in a much better way than I did when I was young. But thinking about the care provider and how are you really just keeping yourself in a place of balance so that you can fully show up during hard moments with families. When we are fully resourced, it's a whole different scenario. If we're coming in kind of burning the candle at both ends, we're not able to really hold the space that we'd like to. So for you, what does this look like?
Yeah, yeah, that's really important. And something that I'm definitely not perfect at. But I try very hard to sort of have that balance in my own life, outside of work, so that when I am coming to a client, I'm not feeling like I'm coming from a place of depletion. Some of that is fairly simple and things that people probably already think about, but are important nonetheless, which is eating well, trying to stay hydrated. If I'm on a long shift, I'm not going to not bring lunch or a snack, like trying to think ahead and make sure that I'm not sort of randomly throwing like a bag of chips in my bag because at 3 o'clock I'm going to be very hungry and probably not feeling well. And if I'm helping out a family who is in crisis, or even if they're not, the quality of care that I can provide is not going to be as good as when I am, nourished, rested, hydrated, things like that. But outside of sort of basic human bodily needs, I think having a community is really important and is a privilege I did not have until recently when I moved to Ithaca. Um, I'm in a collective now, and so having a group of doulas that I can talk to and they can talk to me and we can share our experiences and our knowledge has made a huge difference and has really helped me feel like, okay, other people are also doing this work that is at times very hard, but very important. And when I'm feeling, wow, I'm overwhelmed, I'm working with a family that is really struggling, being able to even just send a text and say, hey, this is what's going on with me. Does anyone either have recommendations or advice, or like, can we just grab a cup of coffee? Because I feel like, while like respecting this family's privacy and not giving too much information, I just need to sit with someone and sort of allowing myself to be cared for in the ways that I care for families, to let someone else hold that space for me, which is vulnerable and difficult. And I think, some doulas, myself included, really struggle with that, to be sort of on the opposite end of that role. But it's so important. You need to be replenished. And that's why it's not just replenished with food and water, it's replenished with community and being cared for. Which is, again, I'm so so grateful to have this now, because it has been like many years of me sort of being the only person I know doing this work with families. And as much as I love my partner and my family, my friends, it's different when you talk with someone who really says, oh my gosh, yes, I had a client a year ago who also was struggling with that. Or, you know, I have also witnessed birth trauma and this is what helped me with it. It's a different impact than a friend just saying, like, wow, that's really hard. They're both helpful. But I think if you have the opportunity to have both, really taking advantage of those resources are really important. Um, and then the other thing that I find the hardest to do is knowing when to just say no. You can't take on more. You're really at your limit. Um, I'm getting there. I love this work so much and I find it so rewarding and it's sort of emotionally fulfilling in a way, but it can weigh on you. And when you're not taking the time to say, I have to find a life outside of just caring for other people, I think that can really accumulate in a way where all of a sudden you are feeling super burnt out. Um, I'm really conscious of this with doing overnight postpartum work, which I'm doing at the moment and I do pretty frequently, making sure, there are days that I'm not doing an overnight and then another and then another and then a daytime shift, because your body just hits a point where it can't take it anymore. Um, and so I think reminding myself and encouraging other people to remind themselves that the weight of the world is not on our shoulders. And while we are of immense value to the families that we work with, we can't be the sole thing holding them together. And if we are, that really it's a problem. It's not helpful if that's the case. And sometimes that means working with a family to say, I'm going to need a break. I'm taking these weeks in the future off. But here are other doulas that I know of that you can get in contact with, or, here is that lactation consultant that you might want to consider following up with. Again, that's why resources are so important. So it's not just all up to you.
Hmm. I'm reminded of how there's so much overlap between how necessary the care is in postpartum and how it's so relevant to us throughout the rest of life as well.
Yeah.
So even if it's not the exact same type of care, the considerations are all human universal considerations for managing the bigness of life and the bigness of transitions and keeping ourselves in a place where we don't come to that place of crisis where we're catching it by setting up the qualities that we need, like our community and our rest and our nourishment and all of those things. And so for me, it doesn't ever get old or not relevant to be in this field because as I'm doing, I'm also reinforcing for myself. Um, Chloe, thank you so much for sharing about your experiences. And, I think I'm also it feels very affirming, and that regardless of how moments of crisis can appear for each person, for me, like I'm taking away, who are my resources as a care provider, and how am I gathering a safety net to hold families beyond what my own scope of practice is? How am I helping this family to bring in more people than just me? It doesn't have to be paid people. It can be people in
Yeah.
our family or, different, friend circles or church communities or all kinds of different things where people are supporting people. And really just coming back to that nervous system regulation and all the ways that we can do that through supporting the gut. And partners, yeah, there's a lot here, but it's really, really beautiful to see it through the lens of your own practice, Chloe.
Thank you so much.
So we will make sure to have all of Chloe's information. She's got a beautiful social media presence where she's putting out some incredibly valuable videos and posts. We'll make sure that that's there. And Chloe, thank you again.
Thank you. So nice to talk with you.
Shine.
The Center for Sacred Window Studies has been training postpartum care providers, professionals who work with new families, and individuals passionate about postpartum care since 2018. We regularly host live free events alongside our online and in-person training and certification programs. Hop on our newsletter list to get direct access to all of our events and community support gatherings. Our mission is not only in training conscious postpartum care providers, but in fostering a robust, informed, and thriving community of postpartum professionals. Once you step inside, you're family forever. Visit www.sacredwindowstudies.com to add your email to our newsletter list. You can support our work by subscribing to the Sacred Window podcast and sharing with someone you know who would love it. Thanks for being here and participating in the culture-wide shift that recognizes the need for and the importance of conscious postpartum care.